The crimson leaves of the Jessa trees were dying again, and Nira knew it wasn't natural. She knelt in the soft purple soil of Celestini Prime, her fingers gentle as she examined the wilting foliage. Each leaf told a story of chemical corruption, of something foreign eating away at the planet's delicate ecosystem. The bioscanner in her other hand confirmed what her heart already knew. The toxin levels had spiked again, despite the corporate reports claiming otherwise. "Mama, why are the pretty trees sick?" Nira looked up to find her son Jackson watching her with those impossibly green eyes that reminded her so much of his father, lost in the void 2 years ago during a routine mining expedition. At 12, Jackson was all sharp angles and curiosity, his dark hair falling across his forehead. As he crouched beside her, "Someone is hurting them, sweetheart," she said softly, not wanting to lie to him. Nira had always believed children deserved truth, even when it was painful. "But Mama's going to make it better." Jackson picked up one of the fallen crimson leaves, turning it over in his small hands. "Like how you made the gardens back home grow again." "Exactly like that." She ruffled his hair, her heart aching with fierce love for this boy who trusted her so completely. "Remember what Mama always says, that plants are honest," Jackson recited dutifully. "They can't lie about what's hurting them, and if we listen to them, they'll tell us how to help." Nira smiled, despite the growing dread in her chest. She'd been documenting the contamination for months now, building an irrefutable case against Nexus Corporation's terraforming protocols. The evidence was damning. They were using banned chemicals to accelerate the planet's development, prioritizing profit over the long-term health of the ecosystem. The problem was that exposing Nexus meant challenging the most powerful entity in this sector of space. They owned everything on Celestini Prime, the mining rights, the agricultural patents, the transportation systems, even the communication networks. Nira was just a botanist, a single mother trying to make a living on the frontier. But the plants were dying, and with them, the future of this world. "Mama, look." Jackson pointed toward the horizon, where the massive Nexus facility dominated the landscape. Its gleaming towers stretched toward the lavender sky, and streams of ships moved in and out like metal insects. From this distance, it looked almost beautiful, a testament to human ingenuity and progress. Nira knew better. She'd worked inside those towers for 3 years before requesting a transfer to field research. She'd seen the reports that never made it to the public, heard the conversations that happened behind closed doors. Nexus executives didn't care about Celestini Prime's future. They cared about extracting maximum value before moving on to the next world. "It's pretty," Jackson said wistfully. "Like a castle in the stories you tell me. Sometimes the prettiest things hide the darkest secrets," Nira murmured, then immediately regretted it. Jackson was still young enough to believe in heroes and happy endings. She didn't want to steal that innocence from him, not yet. They spent the rest of the afternoon collecting samples, Jackson helping by holding specimen containers and taking notes in his careful handwriting. He was a bright child, already showing an aptitude for the sciences that made Nira's heart swell with pride. Perhaps one day he would carry on her work, healing worlds instead of exploiting them. As the twin suns began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, they made their way back to their small research station. It wasn't much, just a cluster of prefabricated buildings connected by covered walkways, but it was home. Nira had made it cozy with hanging plants and soft fabrics, creating a sanctuary of warmth in the vast wilderness. "Can we make pasta tonight?" Jackson asked as they entered their quarters. "The kind with the mushrooms we found last week." "Of course, love." Nira was already moving toward the kitchen, her mind still turning over the day's findings. The contamination was spreading faster than she'd feared. If something wasn't done soon, the entire northern continent would be uninhabitable within a decade. While Jackson did his homework at the kitchen table, Nira prepared their simple meal and finalized her report. She'd been working on it for weeks, cross-referencing data from dozens of sites across the planet. The pattern was unmistakable. Wherever Nexus had implemented their accelerated terraforming protocols, the native ecosystem began to collapse within months. "Mama, are you going to send that to the news people?" Jackson asked. Looking up from his mathematical equations, Nira paused. her finger hovering over the transmission button. Once she sent this report to the independent journalists on the core worlds, there would be no going back. Nexus would know she was responsible, and their response would be swift and merciless. But what choice did she have? The plants couldn't speak for themselves. Yes, sweetheart. Mama has to do what's right. She pressed send. The response came faster than she'd expected. 3 days later, a Nexus security team arrived at their station while Jackson was at his weekly classes in the nearest settlement. Nira watched them approach through her window, their black uniforms stark against the purple landscape. The man leading them was Damon Vex, Nexus's regional director. She'd met him once at a company function, a tall, silver-haired man with cold eyes and a smile that never reached them. He'd struck her as someone who viewed people as assets to be managed, or obstacles to be removed. "Dr. Nira Hawthorne," he said as he entered her lab, not bothering to knock. "You've caused quite a stir on the core worlds." "I've reported the truth," Nira replied, keeping her voice steady despite the fear crawling up her spine. "Something Nexus seems allergic to." Vex laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Truth is a luxury we can't afford on the frontier. Order, progress, prosperity, these are the values that matter, not when they're built on a foundation of poison." "Poison?" Vex examined one of her sample containers, his expression mocking. "I see opportunity. This planet will house 1 billion people within 50 years. A few inconvenient plants are a small price to pay for that achievement. Those inconvenient plants are the foundation of the entire food chain. Without them, your 1 billion people will have nothing to eat but processed nutrients shipped from the core worlds. Then they'll be dependent on Nexus for survival. Excellent for business." The casual cruelty of his words hit Nira like a physical blow. She'd known Nexus was profit-driven, but this level of calculated callousness was beyond what she'd imagined. "I won't let you destroy this world," she said. "You won't stop us either." Vex nodded to his security team. "Dr. Hawthorne, you're under arrest for corporate espionage, data theft, and seditious conspiracy. That's ridiculous. I reported publicly available environmental data collected using Nexus equipment from Nexus-controlled territory, while employed as a Nexus contractor. I'm afraid your whistleblowing activities constitute a serious breach of your employment agreement." They found the fabricated evidence, exactly where Vex had planted it. Encrypted files on her personal computer, suggesting she'd been selling Nexus trade secrets to competitors. The trial was a farce, conducted by a Nexus-owned court with a Nexus-paid judge. Nira's appointed defender made only token arguments before advising her to accept a plea bargain. She refused. They executed her on a gray morning, 6 weeks after her arrest. The charges were treason against the colonial authority, a capital offense that Nexus had lobbied to create specifically for cases like hers. Jackson wasn't allowed to attend the execution. He waited at the station with Mrs. Cordelia, their elderly neighbor, while his mother died for the crime of telling the truth. When the news came, he didn't cry. He didn't scream or rage or break anything. He simply sat in his mother's chair, holding one of her botanical journals, reading about the healing properties of Jessa tree leaves. She was trying to save the trees, he whispered to Mrs. Cordelia, his young voice hollow with grief. "Yes, dear, she was trying to save everything, and they killed her for it." Mrs. Cordelia had no answer for that. What could she say to a 12-year-old boy whose mother had been murdered for doing what was right? That night, Jackson stood in his mother's garden behind the research station, surrounded by the plants she'd loved so dearly. Many of them were already showing signs of the contamination, their leaves turning brown at the edges, their stems growing weak and brittle. He picked up a handful of the purple soil, letting it run through his fingers. Somewhere in the darkness, he could hear the distant hum of Nexus machinery, grinding away at the planet's future. "I promise, Mama," he whispered to the star-filled sky. "I promise they'll pay for what they did to you." The crimson tears of the Jessa trees continued to fall around him, each drop a promise of his own. The man who had once been Jackson Hawthorne moved through the Nexus executive tower. Like a whisper of death, 15 years had transformed the grieving 12-year-old into something else entirely. 6 feet of lean muscle and surgical precision, his mother's green eyes now cold as winter stars. He wore black synth leather that absorbed light, his face hidden behind a featureless mask that reflected the Carter's sterile illumination. On the resistance networks, they called him Shade. Tonight, he was hunting Marcus Thorne, the Nexus Board member who had signed his mother's execution order. Jackson slipped past the security sensors with practiced ease, his movements fluid and silent. The building's schematics were burned into his memory, every vent and access tunnel mapped during weeks of surveillance. He'd learned patience from Kale, his mentor in the resistance. But tonight patience warred with the familiar fire that had driven him for over a decade. Thorne's penthouse office occupied the tower's 97th floor, protected by enough security to stop a small army. For most people, it would be impossible to reach. But Jackson wasn't most people. The resistance had trained him, shaped him, turned his grief into a weapon of surgical precision. He dropped silently into Thorne's private office, through a ventilation shaft, landing in a crouch behind the executive's mahogany desk. The room reeked of expensive cologne and moral decay. Persian rugs covered polished marble floors, while priceless art from a dozen worlds decorated the walls. All of it paid for with blood and ecological destruction. You're earlier than expected. Jackson spun toward the voice, his hand moving instinctively to the plasma knife at his belt. Marcus Thorne sat in a leather chair by the window, a glass of amber liquid in his weathered hands. He was older than Jackson remembered from the trial footage, silver-haired and frail, with the soft features of a man who'd never known physical hardship. "I've been waiting for you, Shadow Walker," Thorne continued, his voice steady despite the fear Jackson could smell on him. 15 years is a long time to hold a grudge, not nearly long enough. Jackson's voice was distorted by the mask's vocal modulator, rendering it mechanical and cold. "You killed an innocent woman. I killed a terrorist." Thorne took a slow sip of his drink. "Your mother was going to destroy everything we'd built on Celestini Prime. Millions of jobs, trillions in infrastructure, humanity's expansion into the outer rim. All for some dying plants." The casual dismissal of his mother's life sent rage flooding through Jackson's veins. His hand tightened on the knife's grip, the weapon humming to life with barely contained energy. Those plants were the foundation of an entire ecosystem. Without them, Celestini Prime is a dead world in slow motion. "Celestini Prime houses 12 million people now," Thorne replied. "Productive, prosperous citizens contributing to human civilization. Your mother would have condemned them all to poverty. For the sake of botanical sentiment, my mother would have found a way to save both the plants and the people. That's what healers do. They find solutions that don't require murder." Thorne laughed, a bitter sound that echoed in the vast office. "Healers, is that what you think you are, boy? You've killed 17 Nexus executives in the past 5 years. How exactly does that make you a healer?" The question hit harder than Jackson expected. He'd told himself that each death brought justice for his mother, that dismantling Nexus peace by peace was the only way to stop their destruction of other worlds. But standing here, knife in hand, he wondered if the boy who'd once helped his mother tend gardens would recognize the man he'd become. "They were all complicit," he said, the words feeling hollow even to his own ears. "And what about their families, their children?" Thorne leaned forward, his eyes boring into Jackson's mask. "Do you think about the orphans you've created, or are they just acceptable casualties in your righteous crusade?" Jackson's hand trembled slightly. He'd tried not to think about the collateral damage of his war, the wives and children left behind by his targets. Each time the guilt threatened to surface, he'd pushed it down, buried it beneath layers of anger and purpose. "They made their choices," he whispered, "as did your mother." Thorne set down his glass and stood slowly, his movements careful and deliberate. "She chose to betray the people who trusted her, to bite the hand that fed her family. We simply responded appropriately." The rage exploded through Jackson's control like a solar flare. He moved without conscious thought, crossing the space between them in a heartbeat. The plasma knife pierced Thorne's chest with surgical precision, its energy blade cauterizing the wound even as it killed. Thorne gasped, his eyes wide with shock and pain. "You're just like us now," he wheezed, blood frothing at his lips. A killer hiding behind righteous excuses. Jackson watched the light fade from Thorne's eyes, feeling nothing but emptiness where satisfaction should have been. Another name crossed off his list, another step closer to complete revenge. So why did he feel more hollow than before? Target eliminated. He spoke into his comm unit, his voice mechanically calm. Extraction point Alpha in 15 minutes. Tessa's voice crackled back through the encrypted channel. Acknowledged. Shade. Beautiful work as always. Tessa Kane was the Resistance's intelligence coordinator, a sharp-minded woman with cybernetic implants that let her slice through corporate security. Like a hot knife through butter, she'd been the one to identify Thorne's location, to provide the building schematics and security protocols that made tonight's mission possible. Jackson had worked with her for 3 years now, ever since Cale recruited him from the outer settlements. She was brilliant, fearless, and completely dedicated to bringing down the corporate oligarchy that strangled human space. She was also one of the few people who could look at him without flinching. He made his way to the extraction point, a maintenance platform on the building's exterior where a stealth craft waited. Tessa piloted it herself, her augmented reflexes allowing her to navigate the tower's defensive grid within human precision. "Rough night?" she asked as he settled into the passenger's seat. Noting the tension in his shoulders, Thorne said something. "That bothered me." Jackson pulled off his mask, revealing the sharp-featured face beneath. His mother's green eyes were haunted, shadows pooling in the hollows of his cheeks. "What did the bastard say?" "He asked me how many orphans I've created." Tessa was quiet for a long moment as they flew through the neon-lit canyons of the corporate district. Finally, she reached over and touched his hand, a rare gesture of comfort from someone who'd learned to keep her emotions carefully controlled. "The difference between us and them," she said softly, "is that we feel guilt for the necessary evils. They sleep soundly after committing unnecessary ones. Does that make it right? It makes it better than the alternative." She squeezed his fingers gently. "Your mother died trying to save a world, Jackson. You're finishing what she started." But as they disappeared into the city's darkness, Jackson wondered if his mother would recognize the weapon her gentle son had become. The refugee camp on Kepler 7 looked like a wound carved into the planet's russet surface. Jackson crouched behind a ridge of crystalline rock, studying the sprawling collection of emergency shelters and makeshift medical tents through his scope. Intel suggested that Nexus was using the camp as a cover for weapons trafficking, funneling arms to corporate militias while publicly claiming humanitarian aid. His mission was simple: infiltrate the camp, gather evidence, and eliminate the Nexus operatives if necessary. Just another step in the long war against the corporation that had destroyed his life. But as he watched the scene below, something felt wrong. Refugees moved between the shelters with the careful deliberation of people who'd lost everything. Children played in the dust with improvised toys, their laughter carrying on the thin air. Medical personnel in faded scrubs tended to the sick and injured with a dedication that seemed genuine. If Nexus was using this place as a front, they'd chosen their cover well. Jackson made his way down the ridge as the planet's twin suns began to set, painting the sky in shades of copper and gold. He'd modified his appearance for this mission, gone were the black leathers and featureless mask, replaced by the worn clothing and hollow-eyed look of someone fleeing corporate persecution. The deception felt uncomfortably close to truth. "You look lost, friend." The voice belonged to a young man with kind eyes and prematurely gray hair. He wore the simple robes of a refugee coordinator, and his smile carried the weariness of someone who'd seen too much suffering. "I heard there might be medical help here," Jackson said, letting genuine exhaustion color his words. "My ship broke down 3 systems back. Been walking for days." "Then you've found the right place." The man extended a weathered hand. "I'm Brother Finn. Come on. Let's get you checked out and fed." Brother Finn led him through the camp's winding pathways. Past families gathered around small cooking fires and groups of refugees sharing what little they had. The atmosphere was one of quiet resilience rather than despair. People who'd been broken by corporate greed but refused to let it destroy their humanity. "Dr. Ashworth runs our medical center," Finn explained as they approached a large tent, marked with faded red crosses, She's worked miracles with almost nothing. Half the people here would be dead without her. They entered the medical tent, and Jackson's breath caught. A woman knelt beside a child's cot, her auburn hair falling like a curtain as she examined a small girl's injured arm. She wore scrubs that had seen better days, but her movements were graceful and assured when she looked up at the sound of their footsteps. Jackson found himself staring into eyes the color of autumn leaves. Warm brown shot through with gold. "Another patient for you, Vera," Finn said gently, found him wandering the perimeter. Vera Ashworth rose to her feet, and Jackson was struck by her presence. She wasn't tall, but she carried herself with quiet confidence. There was something luminous about her, as if she held light inside her chest and it leaked out through her smile. "Hello," she said, her voice carrying a slight accent he couldn't place. "I'm Dr. Ashworth, but please call me Vera." "What's your name, Jonas?" Jackson replied, using the cover identity he'd prepared. "Jonas Winter." "Well, Jonas Winter, let's see what we can do for you." She gestured to an empty cot. "When did you last eat? You look like you're running on fumes." As Vera examined him, checking his pulse, looking into his eyes with a small light, asking gentle questions about his fictional journey, Jackson found himself studying her face. She had the kind of beauty that snuck up on you, not flashy or obvious, but quietly devastating. There were laugh lines around her eyes and a small scar on her chin that spoke of a life fully lived. "Your vitals are good, but you're dehydrated and exhausted," she said finally. "When did you last sleep?" "Few days ago, maybe more." The lie came easily, but Jackson found himself wishing it were true. There was something about her presence that made him want to lay down his burdens, to stop running from ghosts and grief. "Finn will find you a place to rest, but first, let me get you some food and water." She turned toward a supply cabinet, then paused. "Jonas, thank you." "For what?" "For making it here alive, for not giving up." She smiled, and it transformed her entire face. The galaxy needs people who refuse to quit, especially now. Over the next 3 days, Jackson maintained his cover while searching for evidence of Nexus involvement. But the more time he spent in the camp, the more convinced he became that intelligence had been wrong. This wasn't a corporate front. It was exactly what it appeared to be: a sanctuary for people displaced by the endless wars between megacorporations. And at the center of it all was Vera. He watched her work 18-hour shifts without complaint, treating everything from radiation, poisoning to broken bones with equal compassion. She sang lullabies to frightened children in 3 different languages, held the hands of dying refugees who had no family left, and somehow found reasons to smile even in the midst of overwhelming suffering. On his 3rd evening in the camp, Jackson found her sitting beside a small boy who couldn't have been more than 8 years old. The child was catatonic, staring at nothing with huge dark eyes that had seen too much. "This is Zen," Vera said softly as Jackson approached. "Nexus destroyed his homeworld 6 months ago. Strip mining operation. His parents didn't make it out." Jackson's chest tightened. The boy looked so much like he had at that age, lost, broken, carrying wounds that might never heal. "He hasn't spoken since he arrived," Vera continued. "But I know he's still in there. Sometimes healing isn't about medicine. Sometimes it's just about showing someone they're not alone." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small flowering plant in a makeshift pot. Jackson recognized it immediately. A Jessa tree cutting, the same crimson-leafed species his mother had died trying to protect. "Where did you get that?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "I've been collecting seeds and cuttings from refugees' homeworlds," Vera said, her attention still focused on the boy. "When Nexus destroys a planet's ecosystem, sometimes all that's left are the plants people managed to save. I'm hoping to start a seed bank, preserve what we can for future generations." She placed the small plant in Zen's lap. "This grew on a world called Celestini Prime. Someone very brave tried to save trees like this one. Maybe we can finish what they started." Zen's fingers moved almost imperceptibly, barely touching the plant's small leaves. Jackson had to look away, his throat tight with unexpected emotion. He'd spent 15 years becoming a weapon, honing himself into an instrument of revenge. but watching Vera tend to this broken child with infinite patience, he remembered the man his mother had wanted him to become. You believe people can be healed, he said quietly, even after terrible things happen to them. Vera looked up at him then, and he felt exposed under her gaze, as if she could see through all his carefully constructed masks. I believe love is stronger than trauma, she said simply. It takes time, and patience, and faith. But yes, I believe anyone can heal if someone cares enough to help them. That night, Jackson lay in his assigned shelter, staring at the star-filled sky. His mission was a failure. There was no Nexus conspiracy here. No weapons cached to destroy or operatives to eliminate. By all rights, he should contact Tessa and extract immediately. But for the first time in 15 years, he didn't want to leave. He wanted to stay and watch Vera work miracles with nothing but compassion and stubborn hope. He wanted to help Zen speak again, to see the boy smile. He wanted to learn how someone could live surrounded by so much pain and still choose gentleness. He wanted to remember what it felt like to build instead of destroy. The message arrived on a blood-red dawn, crackling through Jackson's encrypted calm with the urgency of years of waiting. We found him. Tessa's voice was electric with triumph. Damon Vex, the architect of your mother's murder. He's on Titan Station, retired but not beyond reach. Jackson stood at the edge of the refugee camp, watching Vera tend to the morning's injured. 3 weeks had passed since his failed mission. 3 weeks of pretending to be Jonas Winter while his heart learned to beat in rhythms he'd forgotten. Vera moved between patients like a dancer, her auburn hair catching the early light as she brought comfort to the broken. Jackson, did you hear me? Tessa's voice sharpened. This is it. This is what we've been working toward for 15 years. I heard you. His fingers tightened around the comm unit. Damon Vex, the silver-haired executive who had signed his mother's death warrant, who had spoken of her with such casual cruelty, the man whose face had haunted Jackson's dreams for over a decade. I'm sending coordinates. Can you be ready to extract in 6 hours? Jackson watched Vera kneel beside young Zen, patiently coaxing the boy to hold the Jessa tree cutting. The child had spoken his first words yesterday, just thank you in a whisper, but Vera had wept with joy as if he'd recited poetry. 6 hours, Jackson confirmed, his voice hollow, but as he cut the connection, doubt clawed at his chest like a living thing. Titan Station hung in the void like a metal flower, its rotating sections gleaming against the star field. It was a retirement haven for corporate elites, those who had accumulated enough wealth and power to buy themselves a golden cage in the outer rim. Jackson moved through its carpeted corridors with familiar purpose, but something had changed. The righteous fury that had sustained him for 15 years felt muted, replaced by an ache he couldn't name. Every step took him further from the refugee camp, from Vera's gentle hands and healing smile, from the man he'd been learning to become. Damon Vex lived in the station's most exclusive sector, his penthouse suite a monument to a lifetime of exploitation. At 78, he was frailer than Jackson remembered from old corporate footage, bent with age, his silver hair now white as winter frost. But his eyes remained the same, cold, calculating, empty of remorse. Jackson found him in his study, surrounded by books and art stolen from a dozen worlds. The old man looked up from his reading, without surprise, as if he'd been expecting this moment. The Hawthorne boy, Vex said, his voice still carrying traces of the authority that had once commanded star systems. You've grown tall. You have your mother's eyes, don't. The word came out as a growl. Jackson's hand moved to the plasma knife at his belt, muscle memory taking over. Don't you dare speak of her. Nero was brilliant, Vex continued, apparently oblivious to the threat. One of the finest botanists I ever employed. Such a waste, really. If she'd simply kept her mouth shut, she'd still be alive. You'd have grown up with a mother. The casual dismissal of his mother's principles sent rage flooding through Jackson's veins. She couldn't keep quiet while you poisoned an entire world. I saved that world. Vex struggled to his feet, leaning heavily on a walking stick. Celestini Prime now houses 14 million people. Its economy generates more wealth in a year than most star systems produce in a decade. Your mother would have condemned all of that for the sake of some decorative plants. Those plants were the foundation of the ecosystem. Without them, we found alternatives. Vex waved dismissively toward the window, where Titan Station's gardens bloomed with artificial beauty. Hydroponics, synthetic nutrients, controlled environments. We evolved beyond nature's limitations. Jackson drew. The plasma knife, its energy blade humming to life. You killed her because she stood in the way of your profits. I killed her because she was naive. Vex's eyes hardened, showing flashes of the corporate predator he'd once been. She believed in fairy tales, that we could have progress without sacrifice, growth without consequences. The universe doesn't work that way, boy. Someone always pays the price for human advancement, and you decided who. I decided what was necessary. Vex took a step closer, unafraid despite the weapon trained on his heart. Do you know what your precious mother's crusade accomplished? Nothing. Celestini Prime thrives. Nexus Corporation continues to expand. The galaxy moves forward while she rots in an unmarked grave. The words hit like physical blows, each one designed to inflict maximum pain. Jackson felt the familiar fire building in his chest, the rage that had sustained him through 15 years of violence and loss. Then he heard Vera's voice in his memory. I believe love is stronger than trauma. It takes time and patience and faith. But yes, I believe anyone can heal if someone cares enough to help them. You're right, Jackson said quietly, his grip loosening slightly on the knife. My mother's crusade failed. The corporate machine ground her up and moved on. But she planted something else, something you couldn't kill. Vex frowned, uncertainty flickering across his weathered features. She planted love. Jackson continued. For growing things, for healing, for protecting what can't protect itself. That love survived in me, even when I tried to bury it under hatred. And now, he thought of Vera's hands tending wounded refugees, of Little Zen clutching his Jessa, tree cutting, of a camp full of broken people choosing compassion over despair. Now I understand what she was really fighting for. Not just plants or ecosystems, but the idea that we can be better than our worst impulses, that we can choose creation over destruction. The plasma knife powered down with a soft whine. Vex stared at him in disbelief. You're letting me live after everything I've done to you. I'm choosing not to become you. Jackson clipped the weapon back to his belt. My mother taught me that all growing things deserve a chance to heal, even poisoned. Old men. He turned toward the door, then paused. Celestini Prime is dying, you know. The ecosystem collapse your chemicals started has accelerated. The planet has maybe 20 years before it becomes uninhabitable. When that happens, 14 million people will need somewhere to go. That's not my problem anymore, Vex said. But his voice lacked conviction. No, Jackson agreed. It's mine. And everyone else who chooses to care more about tomorrow than yesterday. As he walked away, Jackson felt something lift from his shoulders, a weight he'd carried so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to stand straight. Behind him, Damon Vex stood alone in his gilded prison, surrounded by the beautiful, sterile artifacts of a life spent taking rather than giving. You did what? Tessa's voice crackled with disbelief across the comm channel. Jackson stood on Titan, Station's observation deck, watching ships come and go like fireflies in the darkness. I let him live. The mission is complete, but not the way we planned. Jackson, this was our chance. 15 years of work, and you just walked away. I didn't walk away. I chose a different path. He thought of Vera waiting for him at the refugee camp, probably wondering where Jonas Winter had disappeared to. There's something I need to tell you, Tessa. Something I should have said years ago. A long pause. You're leaving the resistance. I'm leaving the revenge business, but not the fight. He pressed his palm against the cool transparestal window. There are people who need help. Worlds that need healing. I want to be part of building something instead of just tearing things down. And the woman at the refugee camp, the doctor, Jackson smiled, surprising himself. Her name is Vera. And yes, she's part of this. She's shown me that love isn't weakness. It's the strongest force in the universe, strong enough to heal anything, even someone like me. When Tessa spoke again, her voice was softer. Kale always said this day would come, that you'd remember who you were before the rage took over. Tell him thank you. for keeping me alive long enough to find my way back. The calm went silent, and Jackson was alone with the stars, somewhere in the darkness. Vera was tending to the wounded and broken, proving every day that compassion could triumph over cruelty. And somewhere else, a boy named Zen was learning to speak again, nurtured by love rather than consumed by hatred. Jackson had spent 15 years becoming a weapon. Now it was time to become a gardener,